Turkey was the #1 example of democracy and Islam. But along the way, everything shifted. For most people, it is a country that runs by the dictatorship, runs with injustice, intolerance, and torture.
People cannot speak on many things. Everybody suspicious about everything.
He thinks he's a god. So he can decide you are going to jail. I still remember the people who is suffering in the prison. Erdoğan has to give the answer for this.
Turkey is a unique country in the sense that it's always had this torn identity. It's a Middle Eastern country, it's a European country, it's a Mediterranean country. Economically, politically, Turkey has been a part of the Western security structure for a long, long time. They do not want to be an inward-looking country.
I mean, civilizations have fought over that specific real estate throughout the centuries, if not millennia. And today as well, we have several great powers of the world who are vying for control in the Middle East, and Turkey seems to be a very efficient and effective outpost for whoever wants to control the wider region.
Turkey has been a vital ally for the West for many decades through the Cold War and through the Gulf Wars. It's an important country because of location, location, location. But I think also because it's seen very much as a bridge country. It's a Muslim majority country that for most of its existence has wanted to adapt democratic values, which the more hopeful among us thought could actually become a model for the wider Muslim world.
Turkey had a very different understanding of where it stood back in the Cold War days. You know, Turkey was a member of NATO. Turkey saw itself as a member of the Western family of nations, and Turkey was a role model for Muslim majority countries, especially for those who believe that, you know, Islam, free markets, and a parliamentary democracy can coexist.
But Turkish democracy was never perfect. We had a very strong military that played a very significant role in Turkish politics. Turkish judiciary before Erdoğan was never free. Usually the secularist establishment controlled the judiciary. So Erdoğan, when he came to power in 2002, he inherited a flawed democracy and promised to fix it. And he did, in some ways.
When the AKP rose to power, it was trying to be a big tent party. They reached out to urban liberals. They reached out to Kurds. They said, we want to build a modern Turkey. We want to raise living standards. We want to address, basic problems in our cities, trash pickup, water supply, those sorts of things.
It was a coalition It wasn't just Islamists supporting an Islamist-rooted party. It was the nationalists, it was the secularists, and even liberals like me thought that Erdoğan could finally fix the country's democratic shortcomings.
Erdoğan, as a leader, had done quite well in Turkey economically, and for nearly a decade he delivered phenomenal growth and lifted many people out of poverty. When he came to power, infant mortality rate in Turkey was comparable to pre-war Syria. That's pre-war Syria. Now it is comparable to Spain. So Turks vote for him basically because before Erdoğan they lived like Syrians, now they live like the Spanish.
He had really brought to the table this unbelievable connection with the Turkish people, particularly his hardcore, mostly working class, more religious constituents who viewed him as something of a savior. They felt as if they'd been completely cut out of Turkey's politics, felt as if they had been disrespected and manipulated for too long by the West.
When he was a rising star in Turkish politics, his whole motto was to help what he saw as the underclass, the pious Muslim underclass of Turkey, which had become an underclass because of the secularist regime and hardline secularist policies, like not allowing women into universities simply because they choose to wear a headscarf, and having the seculars, call that a political symbol. That really did, in fact, turn a lot of pious Muslims in Turkey into second-class citizens.
It seemed as though Turkey was kind of moving away from its past of kind of being run by the Kemalist secularist elite. You had someone who had a different face, who came from a different background, and purported to represent everybody. He's the guy from Kasımpaşa, the rough and tumble neighborhood of Istanbul. He was a semi-pro football player. He was a tough guy. And he went to an Imam Hatip school, which is a preacher training school. And he memorized the Quran. And he was put in prison because of a poem that he recited that was supposedly inciting Islamist hatred. And yet he's able to kind of give back to his population that he feels as though was neglected or marginalized or overlooked or humiliated by the Kemalist secularist elite. And he can be the representation of them.
He has always been an Islamist. Since his youth days, he has been at the forefront of Islamist politics.
At Carvana, get personalized terms, browse for cars that fit your budget, then customize your down payment and monthly payment. And these aren't made-up numbers. It's what you'll really pay, right down to the penny. Whether you're shopping or just looking, it only takes a few seconds and it won't affect your credit score. Finally, a totally different way to finance your ride. Only from Carvana, the new way to buy a car.
USAA is made for the safe pilots, like Matt, who can come to a stop with barely a bobble. With USAA Safe Pilot, when you drive safe, you can save up to 30% on your auto insurance. USAA, what you're made of, we're made for. Get a quote today.
We are thrilled. We finally found our dream home in the mountains.
Views are great. The air is fresh. It is bear country, though.
Hey, boo-boo, we hit the jackpot.
Bear.
Look, corn on the cob.
Ooh, chicken. Don't mind if I do.
You're hungry.
T-bone. That's what I call a smorgasbord.
At least Geico makes bundling our home and car insurance easy.
They do save us a ton of money.
We'll take the cobbler to go.
Good idea, Yogi.
Now I'm smarter than the average bear.
You're gone, Dad.
For bundling made easy, go to geico.com.
When he was a teenager, he was directing a play teaching the world about the evils of Jews and Christians and Freemasons. But he had this marvelous trick. He told people that he is now a Muslim Democrat, a conservative Democrat. And he said, I am now pro-NATO, I am now pro-European Union, I am no longer fighting a crusade against the Judeo-Christian world. He basically said, I have reformed. And the people believed.
Biz aşırılıkların partisi değiliz. Biz orta olan bir yolun partisiyiz.
A lot of people were hopeful, but cautiously optimistic, because let's not forget who Erdoğan was. I mean, Erdoğan didn't just appear in Turkish politics in 2002, right? He has this really long background in various Islamist political parties, which were much more hardline Islamist than the AKP. So when he founded the AKP and when he said we've taken that shirt of Islamism off, it was highly suspicious, because he also said things previously that, you know, democracy is a train that you take and you get off when you need to.
Demokrasi hiçbir zaman amaç olamaz. Bu yeni medeniyetin, İslam medeniyetinin onurlu yükselişine katkıda bulunamayanlar zillet içerisinde kalmaya mahkum olacaklar.
And when he came with a vision to take on this mission of, helping an underclass emerge, it sounds very democratic and it sounds egalitarian and it sounds like a positive thing, but he didn't do it in a meritocratic way. He did it through clientelism. He did it through corruption. He did it through, distributing government tenders to his own cronies and family and friends in the construction business. It was all done to prop up this new bourgeoisie, this new Islamic bourgeoisie that would then feed his own powers.
They brought huge tax fines to bear on critical media outlets, forcing them to sell newspapers, sell TV stations, and then they have AKP supporting businessmen come in and buy these entities. And when that had run its course, they turned to the courts and used the courts as tools of repression by bringing cases against individual journalists and editors for leaking state secrets or, as they put it, spreading terrorist propaganda.
More than 30 people have been arrested during raids on media organizations across Turkey. Turkish police raided the offices of a television station and Zaman newspaper, detaining executives, journalists and broadcasters.
If you are becoming a dangerous journalist for the regime, they target you and they eliminate you. And if you are not obeying him, you are labeling as a terrorist. Erdoğan tried to oppress through information, and he's copying the Hitler system completely. If you look at the history, Hitler became a leader in Germany using democracy and elections. And step by step, Erdoğan is using the same process. So he's using Turkish intelligence agency as a propaganda agency, controlling the whole media. Now 99% media controlled by him right now. If journalists are in jail and they close the free media, there is no truth.
I'm prepared for a long imprisonment maybe, but it's a political issue, it's a political struggle, and you have to be ready for any kind of price.
A video shot by Turkish paramilitary police during a raid on aid trucks going to Syria, escorted by Turkish intelligence agents. Dunda reported that the arms were for Syrian jihadists. Their story drew the ire of President Erdoğan, who vowed they would pay a heavy price.
This news is not an act of terrorism, but it's an act of journalism.
If we stop talking, that means a kind of silent society, which Erdoğan needs.
By the end of the AKP's first term in power, it was clear that the reforms that they were undertaking were solely aimed at stabilizing their own power. The way that the judiciary is reconfigured and the economic reforms that are undertaken, it's all a way of marginalizing those really strong sort of secularist institutional obstacles as a way of clearing the path for the AKP. So all of that goodwill and enthusiasm gets wasted once you realize that actually it's about power consolidation.
The founders of 20th century Turkey who followed Ataturk, known as Kemalists, used to say that the system, the secular system, pro-Western political system that Ataturk built could not be torn down in 1,000 years. Erdoğan tore the system down in 10 years.
There's a clear agenda of Islamizing Turkish society, but he's doing it through this soft revolution.
Turkey itself became the inspiration for majoritarian Islamist movements. for example, for the Muslim Brotherhood and other types of Islamist politics that see, Muslims, and particularly Sunni Muslims, as kind of the rightful rulers.
Erdogan had close relations with the Muslim Brotherhood. And, it's been a dream of Sunni Islamists. It's the dream of the Muslim Brotherhood to establish an Islamically controlled state. And Erdogan wanted Turkey to be the leader in its region, what a lot of people have called neo-Ottomanism.
Either this is the first Arab revolution of the 21st century, or it will be brutally suppressed. Arab neighbors nervous of how revolutionary feelings could spread.
Erdogan supported the Muslim Brotherhood, and he suddenly saw them emerging everywhere, in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Libya, in Syria, in Yemen. Suddenly, it seemed that there really was going to be not a new Ottoman Empire, but perhaps something like a Turkish Commonwealth, the equivalent of the UK Commonwealth. They even used that analogy. But most of the Arab states weren't interested in it. Even, I think, a lot of the Muslim Brothers weren't interested in it. And what made it worse for Turkey is most of these Muslim Brotherhood governments didn't come to fruition. Morsi got into power, but he was knocked out in 2013. And Libya descended into chaos. Yemen descended into chaos. So this dream not only failed, but I think it built up a lot of distrust of Turkey in the region.
And I think Erdogan was so spooked by what happened in Egypt, a protest movement backed by the military that ended up in the ouster of democratically elected government, that he feared this would happen to him as well.
In 2013, the Gezi Park protests are the most visible sort of liberal outcry in Turkey.
Hundreds of people slept here last night, bringing their own blankets and mattresses. Taksim has become a little village, much like Tahrir Square in Cairo during the heyday of the Egyptian Revolution.
This was a massive liberal protest movement in which country's citizens basically rose up against him and said, do not tell us how to live and what to do, and we want Turkey to be an open liberal democracy.
When we look back in the 2013 protests, we call them protests because they were. They were asking Erdogan to step down, and they were anti-government protests. But they were more like a festival. You had people coming in singing songs, dancing on the street, and it didn't just represent a narrow secular opposition group. It also included a lot of conservative, pious women with headscarves, standing together with members of the LGBT community, all coming together to protest what they consider to be the authoritarian rule and attack on democracy.
President Erdogan, at that time, Prime Minister Erdogan, chooses to resort to violence in sort of putting down those protests.
It started out as very peaceful protests, and the heavy-handed approach by the government was a wake-up call to many. It was a turning point, and I think that was the case for many liberals who had supported the AKP. Turkey was considered a model country, but now no one is talking about a Turkish model, because the Turkish model failed in Turkey. He has just become another Middle Eastern leader who wants too much power in his hands.
Şu anda geçit halkı boşaltıldı. Taksim Bey'e boşaltıldı. Türkiye'yi dünyaya farklı gösterdiniz. Siz yalanlarınızla baş başa kaldınız.
Protest, chaos and confrontation on the streets of Istanbul. Hours after Taksim Square and Gezi Park were cleared of demonstrators.
At this point, I think it's a foregone conclusion. There is no way for Erdogan to get back to this image that he had as a Muslim Democrat. All of that image is very much challenged since 2013, and there seems to be a wide international consensus on who Erdogan really is.
Sonuna kadar Erdoğan gibi bir otoriter birisiyle bir gazeteci olarak savaşmayı tercih etmiştim. Yani kavga etmeyi tercih etmiştim. Her şey 17 Aralık 2013 tarihinde Türkiye'de Erdoğan ve onun yakınlarıyla hakkında yapılan yolsuzluk soruşturmalarıyla başladı. Bu ortaya çıktı ve benim en çok merak ettiğim şey ülkeyi nasıl sistemli olarak Erdoğan'ın soyduğuydu. İranlı şirketlerin, İran'ın paravan şirketler kurduğundan bahsetti Türkiye'de. Ve bu yolla altın ve doğalgaz kaçakçılığı yaptığından bahsetti. Ve bakanların bu işin içerisinde olduklarını biliyordum.
Erdogan is facing fresh calls to resign amid a wide-reaching corruption scandal that has exposed members of his own family.
Turkey's interior and economy ministers quit the government. Then the environment minister stepped down, calling on Erdogan to follow suit.
Daha sonra o polis şeflerinin en başındaki kişiye biz yasa yapan yeriz, gerekirse sizin yaptığınız suç işleyin, biz suç işlediğiniz şeyi suç olmaktan çıkartırız diye başka polisleri de bu işin içerisine bulaşarak bu operasyonları engelleyip bu operasyonları yapan polislerin hepsini sürüp meslekten atmaya başladılar.
After so many years of being in that position, a position of power, and especially as he consolidated even more power, he's amassed a huge fortune. And it's not just him. It's his sons, it's his son-in-laws, it's his wider family. And there's now a very narrow class of beneficiaries of Erdogan's power.
He has never come clean. He has never apologized. And what Turkey needs to do is not just vote Erdogan out, but Turkey needs to rebuild checks and balances. Turkey has to move from cronyism, from nepotism, favoritism, back to a meritocratic regime. Because the fact that a regime, a corrupt regime, a kleptocratic regime has failed miserably does not necessarily mean that it will leave the scene. Often they fight to the bitter end.
Despite all the problems that Turkish democracy has at the moment, I think Turkey's #1 priority is to address the Kurdish question there and nothing more. If you look at particularly the 19th century of the Ottoman Empire, you see the rise of nationalism. Ethnic nationalism was the main cause of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Basically, the Turkish Republic was founded on this idea, this imagined ethnically homogeneous country, which was never the case. And that was the main problem of the Kurdish community living in Turkey, to be recognized as a separate ethnic identity. Almost 20% of Turkish population is of Kurdish origin. And historically, they have been denied basic rights.
The
The Kurdish people celebrate different languages, diversity, and pluralistic ideas. They want the freedom of religion and the freedom of ethnicities, nationalities, languages to be celebrated.
Buy a car, get this, from their couch. Oh, how disruptive.
No salesman there to help me pick out the car I need.
Well, how does anyone find a car on this site without someone like us checking in?
She's a beauty.
Oh, golly.
I can help you find the color you want.
That sounds nice.
Let me talk to my manager.
Buy your next car 100% online with Carvana.
We've got you taken care of, Sergeant Houston.
Thank you. That was fast.
One call to USAA got her a tow, her claim paid, and even her grandpa's dog tags back. Get a quote.
I've travelled all over the country talking about saving with Geico. But that's the important bit, isn't it? Showing up, saying, hello, fancy a nice chat. And then we talk like two old friends about sticky buns and all the savings you could get by bundling your home and car insurance. But here's the real secret. Eye contact. Do you feel that? We just had a moment. Who'd have thought it?
Geico. Save even more when you bundle home and car insurance.
They are a indigenous Middle Eastern people. They reside in northern Iraq. They reside in northwestern Iran. And then 25 million in Turkey and about 3.5–4 million in Syria. They were promised independence and a state of their own after the end of World War I. But they were basically sidelined to please the founding state of the Republic of Turkey. Their culture was erased. Their language was forbidden. It was illegal in Turkey to say Kurdistan or Kurd. Villages and cities were being razed to the ground, all because they were Kurds.
I mean, forget about politically articulating Kurdish rights or demands. I mean, Kurdishness could not be culturally or politically articulated on any level. A lot of people were sent to prison, tortured. We have one specific place, the Diyarbakir prison, in which Kurds were imprisoned en masse and tortured inhumanely. So in a time where Kurds were being killed on the streets, being tortured to death, certain Kurdish students came together to form the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, to just establish a platform in which Kurdish rights could be demanded.
Turkish troops and planes have Kurdish rebels holed up in the mountains of southeast Turkey. The newly formed Kurdish parliament in exile has accused Turkey of waging a war to annihilate the Kurds, but has also called for talks to find a solution.
The Kurdish conflict really starts in the late 70s. The PKK very quickly resorts to violence, and the Turkish state resorts to violent repression in response. And for decades, there's a low-grade insurgency that ebbs and flows.
In that time, the Kurdish question was now brought to everyone's attention in Turkey. You can actually say that there is an issue. This was only accepted after 15 years of war and 40,000 lives.
And Erdoğan, to be fair, attempted to address the Kurdish question, acknowledging that Turkey had a Kurdish problem. And there was a ceasefire.
Diyarbakır şehrimize hoş geldiniz.
In all honesty, there has been no leader who has been as courageous as Erdoğan has in trying to find the solution to this age-old issue.
And people had very high expectations that Erdoğan could really fix the Kurdish problem. But now, Turkey is in a completely different place. In 2015, President Erdoğan, for the first time since 2002, felt electorally very vulnerable.
Erdoğan lost his outright majority in parliament, and a big part of that was the rise of a Kurdish party that was not just a Kurdish party, that sought to reach out to urban liberals in Turkey's big cities, the HDP.
The gains, actually, of the Kurdish political parties was a shocker for Erdogan.
They captured a historic 13%. So that's when Erdogan thought that dealing with the Kurdish problem peacefully was not going to serve his electoral interests. And in a few months, the ceasefire between the state and the PKK broke down.
Clashes between Kurds and Turkish security forces have once again broken out in Cizre province in the southeast of the country.
The Kurdish conflict in the country reopens. Erdogan sort of let the army and the police forces off the chain, and the fighting that ensued was more bloody than any previous rounds of fighting.
The collapse of peace talks with PKK in 2015 was also linked to what happened in Syria. The PKK has a Syrian offshoot, YPG. That group fought against ISIS with US support, expanding its territory. And that success of that group in Syria, taking towns over, declaring autonomy, having that autonomy recognized by the United States, encouraged the PKK in Turkey to try to do similar inside the country.
To the Turkish state, it's all advancing a political cause that to them is an existential threat. They really fear that southeastern Turkey could one day, break away. So Turkish security forces in the end leveled large sections of majority Kurdish cities, Diyarbakir, Cizre.
I will not forget what Erdogan did to many Kurdish towns and cities, absolutely destroyed them, killing thousands in the process, burning hundreds of civilians alive.
If you're a Kurd and you're seen as a terrorist or a separatist, what would you do? We tried the peaceful process. We did run for elections. We did win parliamentary seats. But we were forced to step down. We were jailed.
We have thousands of members of our party in Turkish prisons right now. That is the extent to which Erdogan has consolidated power and used the judiciary as his own stick to wield over any sort of opposition or any person courageous enough to question his authority.
Buradan güçlü bir şekilde diyorum ki, Sayın Cumhurbaşkanı'nın ardında Türkiye Cumhuriyeti ve Türk milletinin kudreti var.
And now we're in a state of affairs in which Erdogan is aligned with the MHP, the ultra-nationalist.
The Nationalist Action Party. Erdogan allied with them in 2015 after he had his first major defeat in the elections in June. This is a far-right party, kind of like the National Front. So you can imagine it's come at the expense of the rights and freedoms for the majority of the Turkish public.
They're fascist, and I don't think that would be an overstatement at all. It's an absolute vile organization whose members and their party politics have been implicated in massacres in Turkish political history.
Allying with the ultranationalists was a huge turning point for him, and it created this new Islamo-nationalist ethos and policy in the Turkish government.
Recep Tayyip Erdoğan moved from being a Muslim Democrat to being an Islamo-nationalist. He is holding his grip on power in internal politics, but in the minds of many Muslim populations represents a leader who has the courage to stand up to the West and to say that Muslim countries are not subjugated to the imperialist Westerners.
He is funding mosques around the world as a means of supporting Islamic terrorism. These mosques are helping to indoctrinate an increasing number of radicals. These are the very same radicals who have gone to commit terror attacks in other countries like France, Belgium, and elsewhere. Austria closed 7 Turkish-funded mosques and expelled several dozen imams from their country because they are a national security risk.
President Erdogan felt abandoned in 2015, and I think that was the year when Turkey changed its calculus vis-a-vis both Russia and Iran and its alliance in the entire region.
He managed to alienate traditional security partners, particularly the United States, And now he's sitting alone across the table with Russia, with Iran. And it's, you know, it's very bad for Turkey. It's very bad for the West.
Under Erdogan's rule, Turkey has become one of the great enablers of Iran. It has contributed significantly to the survival of the regime. And when Erdogan looks at Tehran, he sees an ally in challenging not only the Western alliance, but the Western way of life. Because for Erdogan's political Islamic tradition, the Iranian revolution was always something they looked up to.
Turkey's Islamism is not identical with Iranian Islamism, but what Iran managed to do and how it keeps defying the United States, I think Erdogan really admires that. And this has helped Erdogan boost the economic relationship, the trade relationship with Iran, even to the point of defying U.S. sanctions against Iran, helping Iran evade sanctions using Turkish territory, banks, government officials, etc.
But today's Erdogan is this complex character who, on the one hand, is still committed to Islamist ideals. He would still like to pursue social engineering in Turkey. He would still like to build a transnational Islamist movement. But at the same time, we increasingly see a pragmatic Erdogan that cares more about preservation of power. He is now, I think, willing to compromise. You know, if it can extend his rule, if it can provide him yet another year or another decade in power.
This is the trademark of an illiberal, populist, authoritarian leader, right? I mean, it's reminiscent of Vladimir Putin. And he has used Putin's playbook so many times, over and again, to consolidate his own power, and has taken cues from Putin's posture on the international stage in terms of his foreign policy.
Erdogan and Putin understand one another's politics. They have very similar kleptocratic tactics. They have very similar crony networks. And I think Putin sees in Erdogan a great opportunity to undermine the West from within.
I think Erdogan sees a fellow strongman, someone who can deliver, you know, without Congress, without questions, without sort of any conditions. But he knows he's vulnerable to Putin.
Erdogan's very much beholden to Russia, because without Russia's permission, Turkey can't do anything in Syria. And Erdogan wants to be in northern Syria, both to control the YPG, which is the Syrian extension of the PKK, and it wants a place where it can, to be coarse, deposit as many of the 3.6 million Syrian refugees in Turkey as it can, to return them.
The scenes are unprecedented, day after day of protest. Syrians now demanding what Tunisians and Egyptians have just won. The people have watched their blood spill for daring to challenge Syria's 50-year state of emergency.
From the beginning, Erdogan was adamant that Turkey was keeping its borders open, and that as a Muslim brother, Turkey would welcome Syrians, they could find refuge and so forth. But at the same time, Turkey did not believe that Syrians were going to be there that long. They did not believe that the Syrian war was going to last as long and as brutal a fashion as it did, and it was hoping to look like the good, benevolent Muslim brother in the region.
And I think it was only into the Syrian civil war that we have seen the Erdogan government beginning to entertain the idea that for tactical reasons, it is okay, it is legitimate to work with various jihadist groups, with various armed groups. He had a firm belief that together with some of these groups, the Assad regime in Syria could be toppled within 3 months. So for Erdogan, this was a short, quick, efficient, necessary evil.
Iran sees Turkey's backing to rebels, which are trying to oust Assad regime, that is an ally of Iran, as the closest Turkey has come to upset this historic power parity that has always foreseen the two countries as avoiding direct confrontation. And I think Iran's game in Syria is to have Erdogan exit Syria, recognizing that Syria is Iran's sphere of influence.
When we look at the Syrian civil war, it was very quickly co-opted by all sorts of jihadists, especially international fighters who were going through Istanbul into Syria, going through Turkey's open borders, even after Turkey claimed to shut down its borders. For a lot of the Islamist and jihadist groups fighting in Syria, Turkish towns have become major hubs. They've used it for all sorts of purposes, from replenishing their cash flows, their weapons, their foreign fighters. All of these groups, including, and I think most importantly, ISIS, constantly, to this day, recount their stories of how Turkey helped them.
The intent with Erdogan is to accommodate the flow into Syria of all of these elements from around the world. You are seeing the most rapid and massive migration into a jihad theater that's ever occurred in modern history, and that has been accommodated by the Erdogan government's absence of policies to prevent that from occurring.
Erdogan's disregard for the terrorism of ISIS and the extremism of its ideology for many years, failing to speak out against it, has really helped fuel all of this as well.
But jihadism, it has a start button, but it doesn't have a stop button. And Erdogan's strategy backfired.
Turkey is reeling from its worst ever terrorist attack, which left 95 people dead and nearly 250 injured, 48 seriously.
While no group claimed responsibility, government officials blamed the attack on the Islamic State group.
Erdogan is increasingly identified with the country's current problems, fighting with the Kurds, war in Syria, refugees from Syria, economic slowdown, corruption, crackdown on liberties.
He's sitting in this 1,000-room palace. He's fearful of assassination. He doesn't brook any dissent. His advisors are terrified of him. And his paranoia and the genuine fear of the entrenched Turkish state, I think, led him to really isolate himself over the years. And
a year old or a few years old, we want to buy your car. So go to Carvana and enter your license plate, answer a few questions, and our techno wizardry calculates your car's value and gives you a real offer in seconds. When you're ready, we'll come to you, pay you on the spot, and pick up your car. That's it. So ditch the old way of selling your car and say hello to the new way at Carvana.
USAA is made for the safe pilots. For Mac, who can come to a stop with barely a bobble. Lucia, who announces her intentions even if no one's there. And Sergeant Moore, who leaves room for her room. With USAA Safe Pilot, when you drive safe, you can save up to 30% on your auto insurance. Get a quote and start saving. USAA, what you're made of, we're made for.
I've travelled all over the country talking about saving with Geico. But that's the important bit, isn't it? Showing up, saying, hello, fancy a nice chat. And then we talk like two old friends about sticky buns and all the savings you could get by bundling your home and car insurance. But here's the real secret. Eye contact. Do you feel that? We just had a moment. Who'd have thought it?
Geico. Save even more when you bundle home and car insurance.
Came to sort of its stark conclusion in July of 2016 with the failed coup attempt.
It all unfolded in a matter of hours. All we saw was images of tanks on the streets and nobody claiming that this is a coup.
These are some of the pictures coming into us which appear to show military vehicles along one of the bridges in Istanbul.
It took multiple hours for the Prime Minister to come out and say, we think that there is a coup attempt.
assassination team sent to the hotel he was staying just missed him, basically. Erdogan nearly died. They almost shot down his plane. This was bearing out all of Erdogan's sort of worst fears. He had been convinced almost from day one that the Turkish armed forces would one day depose him.
And then Erdogan, of course, made his moment appearing on television on FaceTime from his airplane.
Bu gelişme gerçekten silahlı kuvvetlerimizin içerisindeki bir azınlığın
This was an international conspiracy. That's how Erdogan portrayed it. That the people weren't just coming for him, they were coming for everyone. This was not people on the street sacrificing themselves for their beloved leader. This was people that were completely gassed up on foreigners are here to invade via the Turkish army.
Can you confirm that this military coup has been attempted and now thwarted, or are the struggles ongoing?
What we are sure also, we have managed to get control in many parts. The president and the government are in power, and people are climbing over the tanks to protest intervention. They are definitely a small group, but well organized. And as of now, in the last 1 hour, a legal process has initiated against those people, which has been defined by one of the generals as a Gulenist faction.
There are still so many question marks about this failed coup and who really led it.
In the eyes of the others, we were terrorists. I remember my uncle's picture was on the billboards as a wanted man. He started the Gulen movement to fight injustice. He started to promote peaceful Islam and show the world that we are not terrorists.
They are promoting an ideology called Gülenism. Someone who is tried to be portrayed as a prophet, which is very, very, very dangerous.
We're talking about a country that has coup d'etats every 10 years. He sees this and he wants to educate people. They're not terrorists. They're willing to be in dialogue with other religions, other people. They want to make this world a livable, peaceful place.
Bir his alemime gömüldüğüm zaman şöyle demiştim.
The Gülen movement is an Islamic movement. They have a very strong base, millions of supporters. And when Erdogan came to power, they became very close allies. And Erdogan helped the Gülen movement infiltrate into the state structure, into the judiciary, and they became powerful.
This bloody terrorist organization, in the past we supported them, but we didn't know that they had hidden agenda. We didn't know that they were trying to take over the power in Turkey through such attempts.
There was a very clear alliance between Erdogan's Islamist followers and the Gülen movement. I mean, Erdogan carried out a lot of his policies to defang the military, for example, with the help of the Gülenists in the judiciary.
Gülenists felt quite emboldened after capturing major positions in Turkish bureaucracy, and they wanted more. So it became a power struggle. And President Erdogan thought that they could become a threat to his own rule.
This movement had supporters in the police, media, and judiciary, and with help from Gülen networks in the 2008 period, Erdogan arrested a large number of his dissidents. I think the movement is completely complicit in the destruction of democratic institutions and checks and balances in Turkey. And in my view, what happened is there's a theory in sociology, it's called narcissism of small differences, which says that the more similar two people or entities are, the more they hate each other when they fall out. I think that's the Erdogan-Gülen relationship.
And so this is really where it traces back to. So the coup attempt, if it indeed was a Gülenist one, then it's actually a product of this this infighting between Erdogan's Islamists and the Gülen movement.
Ülkeyi terk etme sebebim 15 Temmuz'dan sonra başlatılan cadı avında hava harp okulu öğrencisi olduğum için hükümet tarafından terörist olarak lanse edilmem. Sıradan bir Türkiye'deki bir aile. Ailem normal sabah kalkıp işlerine giden bir aile. Herhangi bir dernek parti üyelikleri yok. Sürekli polisin rahatsız ettiği, askerin rahatsız ettiği, jandarmanın rahatsız ettiği bir ailem var. Şu anda bu olayı Türkiye'de birçok aile yaşıyor. Kendi isteğimle katıldım. Herhangi birinin zorlamasıyla da katılmadım. Kötü adam ne zaman oldu? Bizim hayatımızın dönüm noktası. Normalde biz bir fanusta yaşıyorduk. Siyasetten uzak bir fanusta. Ne olduysa 15 Temmuz günü bir anda bu fanus kırıldı ve dışarıya savrulmaya başladı. Darbenin ertesi günü on binlerce insanın işten atıldığını öğrenince bunun aslında bir kurgu olduğunu, çok önceden bir şeylerin hazırlığının yapıldığını, herkes bir baskı altında. Gülen grubuna üye olan herkesin, dershanelerine giden herkesin tutuklandığı, resmi olan bir bankada işlem yapıldığı için tutuklanan binlerce insan olduğu bir durumda herkes tedirgin. Benim kendi kanaatim, Erdoğan sadece bir kişi. Erdoğan'ı destekleyen %50 bir grup var. Benim kendi kanaatim, Türkiye'de bir tane Erdoğan yok. Türkiye'de yaklaşık 40 milyon, 50 milyon Erdoğan var.
Erdogan used post-coup powers given to him to carry out a really broad crackdown on Turkish society.
The rampant and extremely broad use of the anti-terrorism law to paint anyone who has any kind of dissent is a way to legally get away with putting the people who disagree with you in jail. At this point, no one's safe.
Sur le premier, la définition du terrorisme, je ne vois pas de consensus possible.
During the last 6 years, close to 100,000 people jailed. How can you say these people are terrorists?
The really ironic part of it is that what people fear most of a military regime, of a coup regime, is a major mass arrests and mass crackdowns on civil rights and freedoms. And Erdogan did all of those things. With the state of emergency, it was like we were already living in a military regime. You know, it's like the coup succeeded. Just with Erdogan at helm, it became Erdogan's coup. I mean, whether you support Gülenists or not, whether you support Erdogan or not, you don't want to see this kind of 150,000 people getting detained on thin evidence of nothing.
The police came to our home and arrested my husband. They gave a 7-month sentence. 1 week later, the police called me when I was at the hospital. And the police told me they wanted to see me. I said yes, but after hang up the phone, I thought, I realized they arrested me. They would arrest me. Then I started to hide from police. My plan was to sell my car to get money and find some smugglers or something like that to help us go abroad. We didn't have any other choice because if I had stayed in Turkey, I would be with my husband in jail.
You miss him?
She was crying every night.
In 2 or 3 days, around 20,000 people dismissed from the government. They came my home to arrest me. They accused me of being a member of armed terrorist organization. I'm only professor, I'm an academician, I'm a civilian. So I didn't understand why, they are trying to charge me as being a member of terrorist organization. They labeled those people. And when the time came, they dismissed them. Only 200, 300 soldiers tried to attempt this incident, but more than 500,000 people detained, tortured. They seized my property, they seized money, they seized everything, and they sent me, to prison. I was shocked, I never been in that kind of place before. I stayed over there 5 months. I never see the sun directly. I still remember the people who is suffering in the prison. There is around 700 babies who were living in the prison with their mothers. I witnessed the people torture over there. To confess something, you have to confess something. You have to admit something. I prayed to die over there. I prayed. I believe myself I'm not guilty. I believe that Turkey is a democratic country. They have to give answer to some question.
Türkiye demokrasi mücadelesi veriyor. 100 yılı aşkındır veriyor. Ama günün sonunda ben hep şunu söylüyorum. Türkiye herhangi bir Orta Doğu ülkesi değil. Türkiye'nin demokrasi mücadelesi farklı. O bakımdan ben ülkenin demokrasi geleceğine çok inananlardanım. Dolayısıyla ben kendimi sorumlu kabul ediyorum. Çok hızlı bir şekilde gerçekten dünyanın ileri demokrasisine sahip ülkelerinden birisi olmaya adayız.
In the latest municipal elections in Istanbul, we see Ekrem İmamoğlu, the candidate of the main opposition party with Turkey's pro-secular party, Republican People's Party, who adopted a very inclusive language despite Erdogan's polarizing rhetoric.
He's appealing to a much broader electorate than just his own party. He's reaching out to the Kurds, he's reaching out to other Islamists. He's bringing about this new ethos. He calls it radical love. That's what he's running his campaign on. And in so many ways, he's an anti-Erdogan.
Gelin bu sefer kazanın. Hayırlısı olsun. Bizden olun kazanın. Hayırlısı olsun.
He reached out to the entire population. He addressed Turks and Kurds, Sunni and Alevi Muslims, Jews and Christians. He didn't shy away from being on the record in a country lately known for prejudice and hate speech. I remember very vividly, he tweeted a message of celebration on Passover, and the Turkish social media sphere is normally extremely prejudicial, but it led to a flurry of embracing and inclusive messages.
years old. We want to buy your car. So go to Carvana and enter your license plate, answer a few questions, and our techno wizardry calculates your car's value and gives you a real offer in seconds. When you're ready, we'll come to you, pay you on the spot, and pick up your car. That's it. So ditch the old way of selling your car and say hello to the new way at Carvana.
We made USAA insurance for veterans like Martin. When a hailstorm hit, he needed his insurance to get it done right away.
We are thrilled. We finally found our dream home in the mountains.
Views are great, the air is fresh. It is bear country, though.
Hey, boo-boo, we hit the jackpot. Bear. Look, corn on the cob.
Ooh, chicken. Don't mind if I do.
You're hungry.
T-bone. That's what I call a smorgasbord.
At least Geico makes bundling our home and car insurance easy.
They do save us a ton of money. We'll take the cobbler to go.
Good idea, Yogi.
Now I'm smarter than the average bear.
They're gone, Dad.
For bundling made easy, go to geico.com.
Erdoğan started his own political career as the mayor of Istanbul in 1994. So it's actually very symbolic what this election represents for the future of Turkey. Istanbul is the cultural capital of Turkey. It's the financial capital of Turkey. Erdoğan feeds on Istanbul's resources, and he feeds his own cronies with Istanbul's resources.
You see right now in major cities in Turkey the seeds of a sort of democratic resurgence. There are millions of Turks, the majority of Turks, in fact, who don't want to see their country ruled by one man as an autocracy, who resent the corruption and the crony capitalism. But the courts and the media, the TV stations and the newspapers have been so thoroughly co-opted over the last decade that the outlets really aren't there.
When we take a look at the last couple of elections in Turkey, Erdogan's Islamist Justice and Development Party controlled over 90% of the media, had over 90% of the airtime. He outspent all his adversaries combined. He has dismantled checks and balances. He has engineered Turkey's bureaucracy and the media and the business world. So now, of course, the Turkish citizens are fighting in an unlevel playing field. It's a very difficult challenge to defeat an autocrat in an imperfect ballot box democracy.
Recep Tayyip Erdoğan geldi.
There's a lot on the line in this election, and Erdogan's name isn't even on the ballot. But there's no more prominent figure in the campaign.
Well, here in Istanbul, everybody is still waiting with bated breath to find out what the final results are.
According to the Electoral Commission, the Republican People's Party is in the lead in the country's largest city, Istanbul.
The opposition has won this election. The result is a blow to President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan.
We just had local elections, and in it, the ruling party, Erdoğan's Justice and Development Party, suffered probably its biggest electoral loss that it has in the last decade.
Değerli dostlarım, kıymetli hemşehrilerim, bir akşam özel bir ana hep beraber hizmet. Her şey çok güzel olacak.
For many who had already lost hope in the electoral process, March 31st local election results was a breath of fresh air. They thought opposition can win. Opposition won all major cities. So those people who had lost faith in democracy and the electoral process thought that, well, maybe we were wrong. Ballot box still matters.
State media is reporting that election officials have cancelled the results of Istanbul's mayoral election following weeks of pressure by the ruling AK party.
President Erdogan says that the opposition won with rigging and with corruption. Now a new vote has been scheduled for next month.
Demokrasiye inanan, milli iradeye güvenen, sandığı sağlam gören herkesin bu karara saygı duyması gerekir.
His candidate lost the elections, but after a couple of weeks, he basically annulled the elections. He said, I want a rerun.
It's a galvanized opposition who are outraged over what they say is an egregious act of taking away their fair and square victory.
Residents showed support for the protesters by banging pots outside their windows and beeping their car horns.
It's very dangerous for Erdogan what he's doing. He's coming awfully close to just throwing out an electoral result. That was sort of what everybody agreed democracy was. So if he's seen to just outright reject election results, his support will erode further. And at some point down the line, you can't bottle up that sort of political opposition, that political sentiment indefinitely. It has to have some sort of outlet.
It might have been beneficial for him in the long run for his image between now and 2023, when there's going to be the next presidential election, to let go of this and potentially try to curb the powers that Istanbul has. So he can do a number of things by, cutting the budget of Istanbul coming from the central government's budget. He could make life very difficult for any mayor of Istanbul that is not his own candidate. So to call the rerun for Istanbul, I think, was a very hard decision for him. I mean, he truly cares for his legitimacy coming from the ballot box. He still likes to project this image that he is the elected leader and he is governing with the support of the Turkish people.
Sandık kurulumuzun tüm değerli üyelerine teşekkür ediyorum.
I think he sees himself like Turkey's founding father, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, but he's in many ways an antithesis. He wants to do the exact opposite for Turkey than what Atatürk did, but he sees himself as comparable to him. He believes that he can justify all of his actions if he can make the argument that this is the democratic will of the Turkish people. And that's why it's important for him to keep winning elections, and that's why it's important for him to have the kind of legitimacy that Atatürk tried to derive from the people.
Erdogan believes that he's a Democrat. The problem is when you start messing with those elections and when you start accepting unstamped ballots and when you start moving polling places at the last minute and you start striking people's names from the register, then it's no longer a free and fair election. So you're not actually winning at the ballot box.
Sandıktan çıkana eğer saygı duymuyorsanız bunun adı demokrasi değildir. Bu totaliter bir zihniyettir. Totaliter bir yapıdır, anlayıştır.
It's not just about playing with the ballot box as well, it's actually controlling the whole game. He largely has the supreme electoral board in his pocket.
Yeah, it's very cynical. I mean, he knows he's made the place more authoritarian. I don't think he has any delusions about how he's staying in power. Of course, it's totally cynical, but he likes to have democratic forms. So, he didn't abolish Parliament. There's still a Parliament. He didn't abolish the court system. There's still a court system. He just has a very tight grip on it.
If he cancels Istanbul elections again after June 23rd, Turkey, in the eyes of many, including foreign investors, which is key to Turkey's economy, Turkey will become a full-blown authoritarian regime. And that is something that will really mean the end of Erdogan era.
People are seeing that Erdogan's Islamist project is coming to an end. It has collapsed in foreign policy. It has collapsed in security policy. It has collapsed economically.
We're looking at a major economic crisis in Turkey right now, the kind that Turkey hasn't faced. The numbers we're seeing are unprecedented.
Inflation is running at 20%. Youth unemployment is at 25%. He's not delivering for young Turks. Their parents and their grandparents may tell them, no, listen, Erdogan may not be perfect, but before him it was really bad. The lira was worthless, the trash wasn't picked up, the water was dirty. You know, he improved this country and give him some slack. The young voters say no. You know, when I came of age, we had the metro in Istanbul, we had universities all over the place, we had a decent middle-income standard of living, and now he's throwing all of this away.
But the overall decline in Turkey's quality of life is also hurting some of Erdogan's core supporters. So people are realizing that there's something fundamentally wrong. You know, you can't exclude one half of the society, the one half you dislike, and hope that everything will be great for your health. And I think it's that slow, gradual recognition of that ugly truth that finally prompted some of Erdogan's supporters to start voting for people based on merits, based on who deserves to rule the country.
A sea of support, thousands flooding onto the streets of Istanbul to celebrate the election of a new mayor. Attempts by Turkey's powerful President Erdogan to overturn the original vote by forcing a rerun have been thwarted.
Erdogan's candidate lost with a bigger margin than in the first round. The margin was 10,000, just over 10,000 votes in the first round. It became nearly 1 million votes in the second round.
Yesterday, the citizens of Istanbul elected a new mayor in a well-organised and transparent vote, albeit in tense circumstances. The result is very clear. We expect the freely expressed will of the voters will be respected. The ballot box, not the court, is the best place to decide elections. I believe now is the time to turn a page.
Bugün demokrasi bayramı. Bugün İstanbul'un bayramı. Hep birlikte çok güzel işler başaracağımızın müjdecisi olan bir gün bugün. İstanbul'a hayırlı olsun. İstanbul'a hayırlı olsun.
Örneğin bizim yerel seçimimizde yaşadığımız hem seçim güvenliğiyle ilgili olsun, hem medya, toplumun haber alma özgürlüğüyle ilgili olsun, birçok konudaki verimsiz ve olumsuz koşulların olmamasını diliyorum. Yani seçilmiş insanların haksızlığa uğramamasını diliyorum. Ya da bu anlamdaki eşitlik fırsatlarının bütün siyasi kurumlara ve bireylere sağlanmasını diliyorum. Bunlar sağlandığında bir sonraki atılacak olumlu adımlara imkan tanıyacak bir atmosferi yaratacak hepimize.
With the election, I really think we're seeing something similar to the Gezi spirit in 2013. With these diverse factions of people coming together against authoritarianism. Imamoglu appeals to this generation in a way that Erdogan once did. There's a real opportunity for Turkey to bounce back even stronger if these kinds of movements are allowed to flourish.
Geçtiğimiz pazar günü de oy oranımız %45 olarak gerçekleşti. Fakat bu oran kazanmamıza yetmedi. Şimdi önümüzde Cumhurbaşkanlığı ve meclis için 5 yıllık kesintisiz bir icraat dönemi bulunuyor. Bizim siyaset anlayışımızda millete küsmek, millete darılmak, milleti suçlamak asla ve asla yoktur.
He knows his power. He's playing with this power. People kill each other, people discriminate each other, people hate each other, but there are still 4 years.
I don't think he will change. I think he lost his control over his government. And I think Western countries, they also lost their beliefs in him. And I really think, bottom of my heart, there's no coming back. Once a demon, always a demon.
Sanırım Hitler'den, Gaddafi'den ve Orta Doğu'daki diktatörlerden nasıl bahsediliyorsa Erdoğan'dan da o şekilde bahsedilecek. Çünkü diktatörlerin gelişleri, ülkeyi yönetiş şekilleri ve gidişleri hemen hemen çok benzer. Erdoğan da sanırım diktatör ve bir kleptokrat olarak anılacaktır tarih kitaplarında.
Bence farkında, çok yanlış iş yaptı, yanlış çaresizliği, yanlış iş yapmasına, bir daha yanlış iş yapmasına sebebiyet veriyor. Yani sebebi çaresizliği, yanlış yaptığından dolayıdaki çaresizliği.
The great tragedy of Erdogan is that he did deliver tremendous economic growth. He did reach out to the Kurds. He made important reforms. And then he lost his way, and he undid his own legacy, his own achievements. And so I think his final legacy will really be determined by how he leaves.
There is no guarantee that when he loses presidential elections, that he will concede defeat, that he will hand power over peacefully. Because once you switch over to the dark side, I'm not sure whether there is ever any return from that side.
Trajectory suggests, in my view, that he's going to become more authoritarian. That's because Erdogan knows that because he has demonized and brutalized so many groups, when you put them together, and now the opposition is united, they will vote him out. So he can stay in power only by becoming more authoritarian. If you read in the news that Erdogan is cracking down on more dissent, it's not because he's gone irrational, it's because he's completely irrational in his own world. So I think we'll remember the
from their couch. Oh, how disruptive.
No salesman there to help me pick out the car I need.
Well, how does anyone find a car on this site without someone like us checking in? Oh, golly.
I can help you find the color you want.
That sounds nice.
Let me talk to my manager.
Buy your next car 100% online with Carvana.
We've got you taken care of, Sergeant Houston.
Thank you. That was fast.
One call to USAA got her a tow, her claim paid, and even her grandpa's dog tags back.
I've travelled all over the country talking about saving with Geico. But that's the important bit, isn't it? Showing up, saying, hello, fancy a nice chat. And then we talk like two old friends about sticky buns and all the savings you could get by bundling your home and car insurance. But here's the real secret. Eye contact. Do you feel that? We just had a moment. Who'd have thought it?
Geico. Save even more when you bundle home and car insurance.
The rest of Erdogan years as the years in which Erdogan became increasingly more authoritarian in order not to be voted out.
My big concern right now is that Erdogan is a dead man walking. I really worry what that's going to mean. It could mean Erdogan cracking down even harder. It could mean civil war. It could mean, I don't like to say this, but we know Turkey's history. It could mean perhaps another coup.
More than anyone, I think he knows the crimes he's committed. More than anyone can possibly prove. And I doubt very much he can just go silently into the night, because people have suffered a lot. And it's not just one portion of society anymore.
What keeps me awake at night is the human cost of the Erdogan regime's desire to stay in power. I think he's increasingly becoming frustrated that his legacy is being tarnished. And I don't know what you do when you realize that.
Given that Erdogan has come to the end of his popularity, how much worse is he prepared to take Turkey and Turkey's future? It's very scary to think about.
Our top story, those reports that the ISIL leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi has been killed in a U.S. raid.
Turkish-backed forces are freeing Islamic State prisoners.
They are accusing the Turkish military of hitting civilian areas.
There are concerns Iran, Russia, and Turkey will be able to assert more control.
Islamic State jihadis use Turkey as any organization would use any country with underground means.
Canan Kaftancıoğlu was sentenced to 9 years in jail for tweets that were made between 7 and 2 years ago.
The pro-Kurdish HDP faces difficulties. Erdogan has declared the party an enemy of the state.
I cannot think of a worse outcome for U.S. national security interests to abandon the Kurdish forces who helped us, force them into the arms of the Iranians, and to ensure the rise of ISIS. Our Kurdish friends cannot do it all.